We welcome you to segment number 33 of our instant reaction and preview series. We are joined with Jack Stern. He provides coverage for SB Nation's Brew Crew Ball, also a Brewers analyst for The Score Wisconsin, and also, because he's a hardworking man, director of analytics and pitching strategist of Wisconsin Lutheran College in Division III. So that is something that we all have in common here. We work in college ball. Jack, thank you so much for joining us here. How are things where you are?
Things are all right over here. Really excited for the start of baseball season now. I think we're all ready to see a little bit of big league action. We got games picking up this weekend, so a lot of optimism right now. Getting excited about it. So
yeah, absolutely. Are you down in Florida? You're over still in Milwaukee, or are you
nope,
enjoying?
I'm coming to you from Milwaukee right now. So
Oh, excellent. Okay, all right. So you're not enjoying the warmth at this time. Okay. Well, let's get things started here, and I'll leave the Corbin Burns stuff to Ian, but I want to start off with obviously, someone that was a batting champion a couple of years ago, and led all, or not batting champion, but also led the league in home runs, and Luke Voigt, and he's obviously a part of the team now. What have you seen in the early going from him? Is he someone that could potentially make a difference, or is this just someone that is a non-roster invitee guy that is going to try and battle for a spot?
I think that just from a general standpoint, the Brewers as a smaller market team who's not going to be in on some of these bigger name stars, they're always looking for guys on the outskirts of the market who still have some upside potential. Maybe they haven't performed quite as well as they're capable of the last couple of years. And I think that Voigt is someone who definitely fits into that category. You talked about how he was the home run champion a couple of years ago. The last 2 years, he's dealt with some injuries, and those have bogged him down a little bit. He was still a slightly above average hitter last season, split between the Padres and the Washington Nationals. So there is still a little bit of potential in there. He still hits the ball very hard. The strikeouts are always a little bit of a concern with him because that's the way his profile has always been. But he is someone who could provide a little bit of pop for them. They are kind of lacking in first base step behind Rowdy Tellez, and they could use a right-handed bat at designated hitter too. Right now they have Jesse Winker kind of slotted into that DH spot, but he's a platoon bat, so they do need someone who can hit left-handed pitching a little more from the right side. They do have Keston Hiura on the roster still, but he's a guy who really hasn't been able to find any kind of consistency at the plate. He's out of minor league options this year, so he's someone who might not make it through the end of spring training. I think that Voigt does have a pretty realistic path in front of him to make that roster and kind of help out in maybe a little bit of a bench role where he's kind of splitting his time between DH and first base. So I definitely think that he's someone who's going to be interesting to watch in camp. Like I said, I think the raw power is very much still there. So he's a guy who could very well crack that opening day roster and make an impact for Milwaukee.
Okay, definitely someone that we'll have to keep an eye out for. Ian Schraier, take it away.
Thanks, Joey. And Jack, thank you for taking a few minutes with us here. As we get into the 2023 season, the Brewers have a very wanted man leading baseball operations in David Stearns. And you spoke a little bit about their being a small market team and working kind of on a limited budget. We did see them go out, as you had mentioned, trade for Jesse Winker. They went out and got William Contreras from the Braves now to really help out their catching situation. You spoke about Winker a little before, but can you tell us really what the early returns have been on a couple of these acquisitions that the Brewers have made to help them try and stay in contention in the Central?
So Winker is going to be an intriguing acquisition for them because when he played with the division rival Reds a couple of years back, he was a guy who was really on the upswing. I know I said that he's a platoon bat, and that's true, but he was arguably a top 10 hitter against right-handed pitching for a good couple of years there, like around 2019 through 2021. He was in that top 10 of guys who have really performed against right-handed pitching. And after the Reds traded him to the Seattle Mariners, he ended up having the worst season of his career. He was still a slightly above average bat just because he continued to draw a lot of walks and get on base, but the power pretty much completely disappeared. And a lot of that has been attributed to neck and knee injuries that he dealt with while he was playing for the Mariners last year. And he underwent a couple surgeries over the offseason. And that was kind of going to be the big thing. How did those surgeries go? How was he feeling coming out of those operations? And he reported to camp earlier than all the other position players for the Brewers. And so far, the initial returns have been that he is feeling the best that he has in years. And I know that's kind of a cliche that a lot of athletes like to use as we get started with spring training here. They talk about how they're in the best shape of their lives. But in Winker's case, I have more of a reason to believe it because he was kind of dealing with these nagging issues for a few years now. and he does feel like he's finally had the right work done to correct that. And he said that, he feels a lot lighter on his feet than he used to, and he doesn't feel as stiff as he used to because he has a little more mobility now in that neck and in that knee. So hopefully that's going to be what it takes to get him back to that all-star form that he's flashed in the past. And again, he still has the raw plate discipline that made him a pretty lethal bat in the past. He doesn't strike out a lot, draws a lot of walks. The big thing was he just stopped hitting the ball with authority. But if he's back to full health, he's a guy who could be really impactful. And just your point again about looking for guys kind of on the outskirts of the markets. Matt Arnold, who was promoted to general manager of the Brewers, he's now the head executive going into this season. The word that he used over the winter was opportunistic. The Brewers need to be opportunistic. And I definitely think that buying low on a guy like Jesse Winker, being able to kind of barge into the Sean Murphy negotiations between the Athletics and the Braves and coming away with William Contreras to address that catching position. Even the signing of Brian Anderson, these are all guys who the Brewers believe have potential to either get back to a form that they displayed in the past, or there's something with these guys that a lot of other teams might be overlooking that the Brewers think they can capitalize on. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these buy low acquisitions pan out for them this year, because that's a very big part of their plan to be competitive this year.
And the big piece also, and we can't forget the key piece in left field there, a few years removed from his MVP season, is Christian Yelich. And, and I think the big question surrounding Christian Yelich is when consistently will that same bat come around that we saw only a few years ago. So I guess what has been the discussion regarding Christian so far in spring training, as games get underway in Arizona here these next couple of days?
I think everyone is kind of at a point now where they've accepted that Christian Yelich is probably not going to get especially close to recapturing that MVP form. And I think that even after he had that really strong 2-year run, I think everyone should have expected that he was going to take a little bit of a step back, simply because no matter how good you are, it's really, really hard to continue performing at that level.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anyone was expecting him to kind of revert to the player he's been over the last few years. What's essentially happened is, in 2021, it was arguably the worst offensive season of his career. He rebounded a little bit in 2022, but at this point, he's kind of settled back into being the sort of hitter that he was when he played for the Miami Marlins before the Brewers acquired him. He's a guy who he can still use all fields. He's going to hit a lot of ground balls, and that's going to limit his power output a little bit. But he's still going to give you a solid at bat. He's going to draw a lot of walks. He's going to get on base. He'll make an impact on the bases with his speed. And look, that's still a productive player. You're talking about a guy who is a solidly above average bat. And you add the impact that he makes on the bases, you're talking about, a 2.5 to 3 win player, which is still a solid everyday player. It's not what the Brewers are paying for, though. It's not what they signed him to do when they gave him that franchise record contract extension. But Yelich has a full no trade clause. He's in it for the long haul here. There's no doubt in my mind that he's been trying his hardest to get anywhere close to that form that he had when he was at his peak. I think right now, though, the consensus is that he's more of a kind of a supporting piece on this team. He's not someone that the Brewers are going to count on to carry their whole lineup as they have for the past couple of years. I think that now there's just kind of an acknowledgement that this is who he is at this point. He's a solid player, but he's not a special player like he was a couple of years ago. I think he still has that raw power in him, because we have seen him hit some pretty impressive home runs from time to time, even though he doesn't get into them very often. I think a lot of it is just that he hasn't quite been able to get that perfect timing that he had over that 2-year stretch, because whenever people asked him what he changed with his swing during that time, he said, I didn't change anything. I just feel like I'm making contact at just the right time on every swing. I'm catching the ball out in front and I'm just hitting it with authority. I feel really good. Everything is locked in. And I just think that he hasn't been able to recapture that. And some of that might stem from the broken kneecap that he suffered in 2019 towards the end of the year, the back issues that have cropped up over the past couple seasons. Whatever it is, he's just kind of settled into this range where his timing is okay, but it's just not at that peak level that it's been in the past. And I think at this point, everyone has kind of acknowledged that while it would be great if he can get that back, and it's not impossible yet, I don't think that the Brewers or fans should be moving forward expecting him to get that back. I think a more realistic expectation, like I said, is he's going to be a solid part of that lineup. He's going to hold down the leadoff spot, get on base, but his contributions are pretty much going to be limited to that.
Jack, let me ask you this. Obviously we can kind of switch over to to the pitching side of things, and there's some not only injuries but also some question marks too with in the clubhouse and also on the mound itself. But I want to start with Wade Miley. You got him back from a few years ago. He played with Milwaukee back in 2018. He pitched okay in Chicago, but obviously with the injury to Aaron Ashby as well, he's probably going to miss a few months, which we'll get to in a few moments. But I guess we'll start with Wade Miley, though. Is he someone that can make a difference when there's a lot of turmoil in that clubhouse, especially on the pitching side of things?
I know that when Wade Miley was here for his first stint with the Brewers back in 2018, he spoke pretty highly of the organization, and they were the ones who really helped him revive his career because they got him to lean into this new cutter that he developed. And he basically became a completely different pitcher after emphasizing that pitch, and that's given him positive results that have pretty much carried over for the last 4 seasons or so since he made that change. He's back in Milwaukee now. He's basically still the exact same pitcher that he was when he was here the first time around. So I definitely think that on the field, he's going to be a solid contributor who you can plug into the back end of that rotation, especially now that they are dealing with some injuries early on in camp. And I think that's part of the reason why they signed him as kind of a safeguard against those injuries and to make sure that they did have some depth of guys like Aaron Ashby or even Freddie Peralta, who's coming off a shoulder injury of his own, just to kind of give them a little more flexibility there and to make sure that they're not in the spot where they're kind of handcuffed or short for who they're going to give starts to. In the clubhouse, he was always regarded as, a positive clubhouse guy when he was here the first time around. And I definitely think that helps. It has been a little bit of an interesting story as to what's kind of going on internally with this team over the last year or so. I know that there was a lot of unrest in the clubhouse when they traded away Josh Hader at the deadline last season. And it's one of those things where I think that if you look at it from a pure baseball point of view, just the transaction itself, I think it made sense why they made that move. But it was very obvious that there was some combination of not communicating enough in the clubhouse, the players just not taking it well or being especially receptive to it. I think it reflected pretty poorly on the front office, the way that they handled that. And I don't think it reflected great on the players either, the way that they handled the whole situation. So clubhouse has been a little bit of a concern for them the past couple of months, and hopefully Miley's a guy who can kind of address that. He gives them a veteran presence in that clubhouse. He's been around. He's seen a lot. I don't think there's anything that'll really phase him at this point in his career.
Yeah.
And hopefully he can just be kind of a veteran leader for some of these younger guys that they have too. So it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of meshes together in terms of the clubhouse chemistry.
Ian, close us out with the juiciest topic out of the Brewers camp this offseason.
Yeah, I actually have a 2-parter here, and I think it's a good way to really wrap this up. I want to allude back to your earlier point about Yelich not really, I don't want to say not being able to carry the team, but really not being counted upon to carry the team. And I kind of want to know what that does. We saw the Cardinals come on late at the end of the year to kind of steal the Central away. And for me, I'm kind of curious as to, if Yelich is not producing those MVP type numbers, which granted, I agree with you. He's at this point, he shouldn't, not that he shouldn't be, but that's not what he should be relied upon. Who are they going to rely upon going forward? And then really in the aftermath of what's happened now with Corbin Burns, and now you have players like Brandon Woodruff, Willy Adames, who are going to be unrestricted free agents at the end of the year that need contracts. What is going to be the future for the Brewers? How do they go forward to stay in contention with a team like the Cardinals to stay competitive and stay in contention for the NL Central?
So I think that the Brewers and the Cardinals kind of have different approaches for how they build their rosters. We've seen the Cardinals have the opportunity to acquire some pretty big superstar names over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And a big reason why they caught the Brewers last year is because you had Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado having MVP caliber seasons at the same time. And I don't think that's going to be something that happens again this year. So that's going to level the playing field a little bit. The way the Brewers tend to approach building their roster is you talked about who are they going to count on in this lineup. And I mean, there are a couple of guys who definitely have some upside. We talked about Jesse Winker. I think Rowdy Tellez is going to have a pretty big year for them just because I like his profile and I think he's going to benefit from the shift restrictions. But they don't really have anyone who I would necessarily point to and say, this is like the guy. And that's almost kind of on purpose. The way that they tend to approach building their lineup is not so much adding a huge bat. It's that they make sure that they don't have any black holes in their lineup. There's no position where they're giving at bats to guys who are not at least average or close to average offensively. And that was kind of an interesting storyline to follow with their lineup last year. They didn't really have any amazing hitters. Hunter Renfroe was their best hitter, and I would still kind of put him more in that solid category than amazing. And that's not a knock against him. But that kind of led to some complaints among fans, and people just really couldn't wrap their heads around it when they would keep seeing that the Brewers were like in the top 10 in baseball in like runs scored and home runs and all of the major offensive categories. It just didn't line up for a lot of people, but a lot of that had to do with not so much that they had a huge impact bat, it's that they weren't giving at bats to below average players. And I think that that's a strategy we're going to see them use a lot again this year. They're very big on depth, and that's something that they've tried to address this year. So I think that that's really going to be how they rely on constructing their lineup again this year. And that's kind of what differentiates the Brewers from the Cardinals. As for the Corbin Burnes situation, it was messy. There's no way getting around that. I think that in terms of like industry practice, the Brewers didn't do anything that was super unusual here. Mm-hmm. I do think, though, that just based on the way that we saw Burnes react compared to some other players, we can use the Cardinals again for an example. Ryan Helsley went to an arbitration hearing with the Cardinals that he lost. And he said, they said some things in that courtroom that I didn't like, but he was a lot more willing to move on. And he was a lot more understanding of the process. So I think that the Brewers have not done a very good job lately of communicating with their players. And again, that kind of ties back into the fallout of the Hader trade where they seem to fall short in that area. So that's something that they definitely have to get better at. But again, I think that the good news for Burnes and for the Brewers here is that, first of all, I don't think this really changes his future with the team because he was going to go to unrestricted free agency anyway and make the big bucks with another club. In terms of their ability to sign free agents or extend guys like Woodruff and Adames, I don't think it really impacts that either because it really just comes down to, does the player want to stay here? And most importantly, are the Brewers offering them a fair contract that they're willing to sign? And I don't think the arbitration fallout with Burnes really impacts either of those. I think they should try to extend Adames. I know they're going to have to pay up to do so because we've seen how much money premium shortstops are making. But premium shortstops don't grow on trees. And the Brewers are in a very unique position to have a guy like this who they haven't had for a long time holding down a position like this. And I think that if you are going to make an exception and if you are going to take a big risk, this is the risk to take. I'd like to see him try to explore an extension with Woodruff as well. But if there's anyone they really need to hang on to, I think it's Adames. So hopefully they decide to get some discussions going. It sounds like there hasn't been a lot of movement yet. But we're going to kind of play it out and see what happens moving forward here. So I think that that's a guy they do need to try to hang on to. There's going to be a lot of roster turnover in the past or in the future couple of seasons coming up. And that's kind of by design. That's kind of the way the Brewers roll. They don't really make a lot of long-term commitments because that enables them to retool pretty quickly if they need to, if something's not working. And that's kind of what's allowed them to remain competitive over the last several seasons. But I do think they need to kind of lock up Adames as sort of their anchor moving forward.
Something that we'll definitely keep our eyes on, and a lot of spicy topics coming out of Arizona. Jack Stern, everybody, provides coverage for SB Nation's Brew Crew Ball, also Brewers analyst for The Score Wisconsin, and also the director of analytics and pitching strategist of Wisconsin Lutheran College in NCAA's Division III. Jack, thank you so much. Please let everyone know where we can find you.
So you can find my work on my Twitter page at by Jack Stern. You can also go to Brew Crew Ball and read all my stuff that I post there. I usually have at least one column going up every week. And then there's, other various breakdowns and statistical stuff that I look into throughout the season as I'm providing coverage. Now that games are firing back up again, that's all going to start ramping back up. So my output's going to go up a little bit on that front. And yeah, those are really the two places where you can find everything that I'm putting out. So if you're interested in hearing a little more about the Brewers or hearing some of the takes that I have to offer about what's going on, feel free to follow me at those two spots.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, the Brewers start off with the Dodgers tomorrow. Jack, thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Really appreciate your